The royal palace of Virel glowed like a mountain of glass under the twin suns. Its silver towers rose into the clouds, their tips shining like stars. Thousands of alien citizens filled the great square below, waving banners of gold and blue. Today was a historic day, the marriage of Queen Serath of the Vireli Empire to a human man from Earth. Daniel Cross stood at the entrance to the grand hall, wearing a ceremonial robe of deep crimson trimmed with silver threads. The robe was heavy and warm, and he could feel sweat on the back of his neck, but he kept his face calm and his posture steady. This was not the time to show weakness. To the Vireli, he was a curiosity, a representative of a young, small world, far from the great trade routes of the galaxy. Many of them thought humans were frail, soft creatures, better suited for farming or talking than for fighting or ruling. Daniel had heard the whispers when he first arrived. A common man from Earth. They had called him no royal blood, no great power, just politics. Inside, the grand hall was like something out of a dream. The floor was made of black crystal that reflected the towering golden pillars. Above, a great dome of transparent glass showed the twin suns drifting in the sky. Musicians played soft, echoing notes on strange curved instruments, their long fingers plucking glowing strings. The air smelled faintly of flowers that Daniel had never seen before, bright blue with petals like thin glass. At the far end of the hall stood Queen Serath. She wore a flowing gown of silver-white fabric that seemed to float around her like mist. A crown of living crystal rested on her brow, its edges shifting slowly as if it were breathing. Her eyes, deep green with flecks of gold, watched Daniel carefully as he approached. She was taller than him by a head, as most Vireli were, and her presence filled the hall. Every step she took was graceful, like a predator that knew its strength. But behind her perfect calm, Daniel saw something else: wariness. She was marrying a stranger from a distant planet, and she did not yet trust him. The ceremony began with ancient words spoken by the High Chancellor, his voice deep and echoing through the hall. Daniel repeated the vows in his own accent, his human voice sounding strange next to the smooth tones of the Vireli language. When the moment came to seal the union, Serath extended her hand. Daniel took it gently, feeling the coolness of her skin. A faint blue light glowed between their palms, a traditional sign of union among her people. The crowd cheered politely, though Daniel could sense the hesitation in their applause. Many were wondering the same thing. Why would their powerful queen marry this human? That night, the wedding feast filled the palace gardens. The twin moons shone down on tables heavy with food from 100 worlds. Exotic fruits glistened in crystal bowls, and dishes steamed with spices that Daniel had never smelled before. The guests, nobles, ambassadors, and military leaders, talked and laughed, their eyes often drifting toward the queen and her new husband. Daniel sat beside Serath at the long royal table. She spoke politely, but her words were careful, almost formal. "You have traveled far, Daniel Cross," she said, her voice calm. "Earth must be proud to send you here." "It is an honor to stand beside you," he replied, "and Earth is proud, I hope." He smiled lightly, but she only nodded, her gaze moving back to the guests. He noticed how her posture shifted when certain nobles approached, slightly stiffer, her eyes narrowing. There were politics at play here, layers beneath the smiles and polite greetings. Daniel had seen it before in Earth's own high councils, power games hidden behind feasts and ceremonies. A Vireli general approached the table, tall and broad-shouldered, his uniform heavy with medals. "Your Majesty," the general said to Serath, bowing slightly. Then his eyes turned to Daniel, and there was the faintest smirk. "And the human husband? I trust the journey from your small world was not too much for you?" Daniel's smile did not fade. "It was long, but worth every hour," he said evenly. The general's smirk tightened, and he moved on without another word. Sarath glanced at Daniel as if measuring his reaction. "You will find," she said softly, "that some here do not believe a human can hold a place of importance in the Virelli court." "I've been underestimated before," Daniel replied. His tone was light, but his eyes were steady. "It doesn't bother me." As the feast went on, Daniel listened more than he spoke. He caught small fragments of conversation, mentions of border conflicts, trade disputes, and whispers of unrest in the outer colonies. Once, he noticed a servant slip something into a goblet, but another servant quickly switched the cups before it could be served. It happened too quickly for most to notice, but Daniel stored the detail away. Not all threats came with open weapons. Later in the evening, Sarath led him to a quieter corner of the gardens. Lanterns of soft white light hung from the branches of towering silver-leaf trees. The air was cool and smelled faintly of the flowers that bloomed only under moonlight. "This marriage is more than ceremony," Sarath said. "It is meant to unite our people. But unity is fragile. You must understand, you will be tested, not by me, but by those who doubt you." Daniel met her gaze. "I expected as much. On Earth, when you take a position of trust, there are always those waiting for you to fail." Her expression softened slightly. "And do you fail?" He smiled faintly. "Not when it matters." When they returned to the hall, a group of young nobles were gathered near the center, laughing and speaking too loudly. As Daniel and Sarath passed, one of them, a lean man with sharp features, made a comment in Virelli that drew more laughter. Daniel caught enough of the words to understand. The Queen's new pet from Earth. Sarath kept walking, but Daniel paused for a fraction of a second. He turned his head just enough to meet the noble's eyes. There was no anger in his expression, only a calm, unblinking look. It lasted only a moment, but the noble's laughter faltered. Sarath noticed. When they reached the end of the hall, she said quietly, "You understood him." "A little," Daniel replied. "Enough." The night ended with more music, and the guests slowly departed. The palace grew quieter as the moons sank lower. From the balcony outside their chambers, Daniel could see the lights of the city stretching into the distance, glittering under the night sky. Sarath stood beside him, her gown shimmering in the moonlight. "Tomorrow," she said, "we begin the first meetings with the council. They will expect you to watch, listen, and say little." Daniel looked out at the city. "I can listen," he said. "But if I see something wrong, I will speak." Her eyes studied him for a moment. "You may find that speaking here has consequences." He glanced at her, a faint smile touching his lips. "I've lived with consequences my whole life." She didn't reply, but for the first time that night, she seemed truly curious about him, not as a political tool, but as a man. In the shadows, far below the balcony, a figure in dark armor moved silently along the palace wall. He carried a small device that shimmered with faint blue light. He paused, watching the royal chambers, then melted back into the darkness. Daniel did not see him, but deep in his instincts, the instincts of a man who had survived more than his share of danger, he felt a faint ripple of unease. Something was coming, and when it did, he would be ready. Morning light poured through the tall windows of the royal council chamber. The golden beams caught the polished black crystal floor, making it shine like a calm sea. Long banners of blue and gold hung from the high walls, and the air was filled with the low hum of conversation. Daniel Cross walked beside Queen Sarath, his pace calm but his eyes moving constantly, noting every corner, every doorway, and every guard. The room was shaped like a half-circle, with the Queen's high seat. At the center, around her, were the council members, 12 powerful nobles and generals, each representing a part of the Virelli Empire. They looked at Daniel with open curiosity. Some stared as if he were an exotic animal brought for display. Others gave polite nods, but their eyes showed doubt. The queen took her seat, her silver-white gown flowing over the throne-like chair. Daniel sat slightly behind and to the side where an advisor might sit. He wore a simple dark suit rather than the ceremonial robe from the wedding, and he preferred it. Lighter, easier to move in. The High Chancellor began the meeting speaking in smooth, formal tones. "The first matter," he said, "is the unrest in the outer colonies." Daniel listened carefully. The council spoke of rising attacks on supply convoys, rumors of organized rebellion, and suspected foreign interference. A few members argued for sending more warships. Others spoke of diplomacy and careful negotiation. As they debated, Daniel noticed something. When one counselor spoke in favor of war, another always supported him, and they would exchange brief, knowing glances. The pattern repeated several times. He leaned slightly toward the queen and spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "Those two on the left, they're working together. Watch how they react to each speaker." Sarath didn't look at him, but her voice was just as quiet. "You read the room quickly." "It's part of my job," Daniel said simply. The meeting continued, moving to trade agreements and border security. Daniel kept his eyes on the people, not the floor or the ceiling. He saw nervous fingers tapping the table, eyes darting to certain doors, and subtle nods between members who should have been opponents. By the time the meeting ended, Daniel had built a small map in his mind, who trusted whom, who disliked whom, and who might be hiding something. After the council, Sarath led him through a side corridor lined with tall mirrors and guarded by silent sentries in black and silver armor. "You notice things quickly," she said as they walked. "Most humans I've met find our politics confusing." "Politics are the same everywhere," Daniel replied. "The words and customs change, but the patterns are always there. Power attracts schemes." She studied him. "Were you trained for this?" Daniel's gaze stayed ahead. "You could say that. My work on Earth often meant knowing who in the room was dangerous, before they made a move." There was a pause before Sarath spoke again. "I have lived my whole life in this palace. And yet you saw things today that I did not." Daniel's voice was calm. "Sometimes it takes an outsider to notice what insiders have learned to ignore." That night, Daniel was restless. The palace was quiet, the long halls lit by soft white wall lamps. He walked the outer balcony that wrapped around their chambers. The city beyond stretched to the horizon, glowing under the twin moons. As he turned a corner, he caught a faint reflection in one of the windows, movement on the roof above. He stepped back into the shadows, watching carefully. There it was again. A dark figure crouching low, carrying a small device that gave off a dim blue shimmer. Daniel didn't hesitate. He slipped back into the chambers and crossed to a side door. Without a sound, he entered the narrow servants' stairwell and began climbing. The air grew cooler as he reached the roof. The faint hum of the city filled the night, and the stars were sharp above. Daniel kept low, moving silently toward the figure. The intruder was kneeling near a vent that connected to the royal wing. He was placing the small device inside. Daniel could see now it was some kind of emitter, pulsing faintly. In one quick motion, Daniel closed the distance. His arm locked around the intruder's neck, pulling him backward, while his other hand clamped over the alien's wrist before he could reach for a weapon. The intruder struggled, making sharp clicking sounds in his throat, but Daniel's grip was unyielding. "Easy," Daniel said in a low voice. "You'll only make this worse for yourself." The intruder tried to twist free, but Daniel applied a small shift of pressure, enough to make breathing difficult without cutting it off completely. The fight drained out of him. Daniel dragged the figure back from the vent and pushed him down onto the flat roof. With one hand, he took the device and turned it over in the moonlight. It looked like a transmitter, but also had a small reservoir attached. Gas, maybe? Poison? He didn't like guessing. 2 palace guards finally appeared from the far side of the roof, alerted by the sound of the scuffle. Daniel stood and tossed the device to one of them. "Scan it. Don't touch the reservoir," Daniel ordered. His tone was firm, and without thinking, the guards obeyed. They looked from the human to the Queen's wing, then back to Daniel. "We will inform the Queen immediately," one said, saluting in the Varelli style. Daniel gave a short nod. "Good. And keep this quiet for now." When he returned to the royal chambers, Sarath was standing by the balcony, her gown replaced with a simpler robe. Her eyes narrowed when she saw him. "Where have you been?" "On the roof," Daniel said calmly. "I found someone trying to plant a device near the ventilation system." Her eyes widened, though her voice stayed even. "You caught an assassin?" "I caught someone. Whether he was an assassin or just a messenger, I don't know yet. But he wasn't delivering flowers." She walked closer, her gaze searching his face. "How did you even know he was there?" Daniel shrugged lightly. Shadows moved where they shouldn't. Sometimes that's all it takes. Sarath stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she said, "Most of my guards would have raised an alarm. You acted alone." "Raising an alarm warns the enemy," Daniel replied. "Acting alone keeps the advantage." For the first time since they had met, Sarath's voice carried something new: respect. "Perhaps you are not as common as they say, Daniel Cross." The next day, word of the incident spread quietly among the inner circle. Though Daniel noticed the whispers in the halls, some looked at him with new curiosity, others with caution. At the morning council, Sarath did not speak of the attempt on her life. Instead, she addressed the unrest in the outer colonies again. Daniel sat silently, watching. This time, when the 2 counselors from before shared their small glances, Sarath noticed too. She didn't react, but Daniel could see she was cataloging the moment. During a break, she approached him. "You were right. There are alliances in this room I did not see." Daniel only said, "Watch the ones who say little. Silence can be more dangerous than loud words." That evening, Sarath invited him to walk with her in the gardens again. The silver-leafed trees whispered softly in the night breeze. Lanterns swayed gently overhead. "You've been in my empire only a short time," she said, "and already you've caught an intruder and revealed cracks in my counsel." Daniel smiled faintly. "I told you. I've been underestimated before. People see what they want to see. They don't always see the truth." She stopped by a small pond, the moonlight shimmering on the water. "And what truth should I see, Daniel Cross?" He met her gaze. "That I didn't come here just to sit quietly in your shadow. If someone tries to harm you, or this empire, I will stop them. That's what I do." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, quietly, "Perhaps Earth sent me a gift I did not expect." Far beyond the gardens, in a dimly lit chamber deep within the city, a group of shadowed figures spoke in low tones. "The human interferes," one said. "He will be a problem," another replied. "Then we remove him," a third voice said, coldly. "But not yet. Let him think he is safe." They all nodded in agreement. Somewhere in the darkness, plans were already being made, and Daniel Cross was about to face the first true test of his place in the Varelli court. The great hall of the palace was alive with light, sound, and color. It was the Queen's victory banquet, celebrating a successful trade deal with the Halari merchants. Musicians played soft rhythms, alien dancers twirled in flowing fabrics, and long tables overflowed with food from distant worlds. Daniel Cross stood near the Queen's table, a tall goblet in his hand. He wasn't drinking much, just enough to blend in. His eyes, however, were sharp and alert, scanning the guests, the guards, and even the servants carrying trays. It had been 2 days since he caught the intruder on the roof. The palace had doubled its security, but Daniel knew one thing from his years on Earth. More guards didn't always mean more safety. Queen Sarath sat at the head of the table, speaking politely with a visiting governor. She was radiant in a silver gown, her crown glimmering in the light. Every now and then, her gaze would flick to Daniel, as if checking that he was still there. Daniel nodded to her once, and she looked back to her guests. Halfway through the banquet, Daniel's attention fixed on a servant carrying a covered tray toward the queen. The servant moved differently from the others, too stiff, too careful. Daniel noticed the way his eyes avoided meeting anyone's gaze. Daniel set down his goblet and began moving through the crowd, not fast enough to draw attention, but steadily closing the distance. As the servant reached the queen's table, his hand shifted slightly under the tray. Daniel saw the faint flash of metal beneath the cover. In an instant, Daniel acted. He closed the final steps in a quick stride, his hand snapping to the tray. With one motion, he lifted it away, revealing a compact black device underneath, a weapon disguised as a serving plate. The servant's eyes widened. He dropped the tray and reached for a hidden dagger at his side, but Daniel's grip was already on his wrist. A sharp twist made the blade clatter to the floor. The crowd gasped. 2 nearby guards rushed forward, but the servant tried to break, free. Daniel shifted his weight, using the man's own momentum to flip him over the table. Plates and glasses shattered as the assassin hit the floor on his back. The hall went silent. Queen Sarath rose to her feet. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged chamber. Daniel held up the black device for all to see. "Assassin," he said simply. "This was aimed at you." Gasps filled the room. The guards seized the man, forcing his arms behind his back. He spat something in the Vareli language, words Daniel didn't understand, but the tone was pure hatred. "Search him," Daniel told the guards. "Check for any hidden vials or tools. He's not here alone." The guards hesitated for a moment, at taking orders from a human, but the queen's sharp nod made them move quickly. While the assassin was dragged away, Sarath looked at Daniel. "You moved faster than my guards." Daniel shrugged slightly. "I was closer, and I've seen this kind of move before." The queen tilted her head. "On Earth?" Daniel's eyes were steady. "And elsewhere?" Her gaze lingered on him a moment longer before she turned to the guests. "The celebration will continue," she said firmly. "Our enemies will not see us afraid." The music started again, but it was quieter now, and the laughter more forced. Daniel knew the banquet was already ruined in the minds of many. Later, in the queen's private chamber, Sarath dismissed her attendants and faced Daniel alone. "Twice now," she said, "you have stopped an attack before it reached me, and both times you acted without hesitation." Daniel replied calmly. "Hesitation gets people killed. If I see danger, I move." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "You are not a common diplomat, Daniel Cross. So tell me, what are you?" Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Before I ever came here, I served in Earth's peacekeeping corps. We were trained to operate anywhere, in any condition, combat, intelligence, rescue. My job was to protect lives and stop threats before they became disasters." Sarath's brow furrowed. "Then why send you to me as a political husband?" Daniel gave a small smile. Maybe they wanted someone who could do more than smile and shake hands. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden knock on the chamber door. A palace guard entered, bowing quickly. "Your Majesty," he said, "we have captured 2 more suspects in connection with the banquet attack. Both were disguised as kitchen workers." Daniel's eyes narrowed. "They were working in a team. That means there's planning, money, orders, maybe a whole network." Sarath nodded. We will question them at once. In the interrogation hall, the two captured suspects sat bound to metal chairs, their faces expressionless. The Queen stood beside Daniel, flanked by guards. Daniel studied the prisoners for a moment before speaking. "You can make this easier," he said. "Tell us who sent you." The prisoners remained silent. Daniel took a slow step closer. "You should know something about humans. We don't give up. We keep digging until we find the truth. And when we find it..." He let the words hang, his gaze steady. "We act." One prisoner's jaw tightened. The other looked away. Daniel saw the flicker of uncertainty. Small, but enough. Sarath noticed it too. "Continue," she murmured. Daniel leaned in slightly. "Here's what I think. You weren't the leaders. You're just tools, and tools get discarded when they're no longer useful. If you keep quiet, you'll take the fall. If you talk, you might still walk away from this alive." Finally, one prisoner spoke in a low voice. It was the coalition. Sarath's eyes narrowed. "The Outer Colony rebels." Daniel nodded slowly. "They're not just rebelling. They're trying to remove you completely." That night, Sarath stood on the balcony overlooking the city. Daniel stood beside her, his arms folded. "You've made enemies quickly," she said. "Not just mine, but yours as well." Daniel looked out at the lights below. "Enemies are just proof you're doing something that matters." She glanced at him. "And what is it you think you're doing here?" Daniel met her gaze. "Protecting the future of your empire, whether they like it or not." For the first time, she allowed herself a small smile. "Perhaps I was wrong to think of you as a common human." Daniel smiled faintly. "Perhaps." Far in the distance, beyond the lights of the city, trouble was already brewing, and both of them knew the next move would not be in the safety of the palace. It would be on the front lines of the conflict itself. The alarms started in the middle of the night. A deep, throbbing sound shook the palace walls, waking Daniel instantly. He was on his feet before the second alarm echoed through the corridors. Outside the balcony, searchlights swept across the dark sky. The city beyond glowed with sudden fires. A voice crackled through the palace intercom. "Outer Colony forces have breached the western gates. All royal guards to defensive positions." Daniel grabbed his jacket, sliding a small combat knife into his sleeve. His boots pounded against the marble floor as he moved through the corridor toward the Queen's chamber. Two guards stood outside her door, their weapons ready. Inside, Queen Sarath was already awake, her crown gone, her silver robe tied tightly. Her eyes were sharp. "We are under attack," she said. "I noticed," Daniel replied, checking the window. From here, he could see dark shapes moving across the palace grounds. Armored soldiers in formation, advancing under the cover of smoke. "They have heavy numbers," Sarath said. "If they reach the throne room, the palace will fall." Daniel turned to her. "Then we don't let them reach it." They moved quickly to the war room, a round chamber filled with glowing tactical screens. Generals and commanders were already gathered, their voices tense. "The enemy has already broken through the first gate," one general reported. "Our outer wall will not hold for more than an hour." "Then we hold the inner wall," another replied, pointing at the map, "and prepare to evacuate the Queen." "No," Sarath said firmly. "We will not run. We will defend this palace." Several commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Daniel stepped forward. "Show me their troop layout." The generals hesitated, but one tapped a control, and the map zoomed in on red enemy markers. Daniel studied the positions for a long moment. "They're pushing hard on the west, but here..." He pointed at the north gate. "This group is moving slower. That's your weak link. If we hit them fast, we can break their line and force them to pull back their western troops." "That's madness," one general said. "We don't have enough forces to attack." "We don't need numbers," Daniel replied calmly. "We need speed and surprise. I'll lead a strike team. Give me 30 of your best soldiers." The room went silent. Several pairs of eyes turned to the queen. Serath looked at Daniel for a long moment. "Do it," she said at last. Minutes later, Daniel stood in the palace armory. Varelli's soldiers handed him a lightweight combat vest and a sleek energy rifle. He tested the weapon, adjusting the stock to his size. The 30 soldiers assembled in front of him were tall, armored in silver and black, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. They stood stiffly, unsure of this human giving them orders. Daniel looked them over. "You don't know me," he said, "and I don't expect your trust. But I'll tell you this. If we do exactly what I say, we will win. Not because we're stronger, because we'll be smarter." They didn't respond, but a few adjusted their stances, paying closer attention. They moved through the side passages of the palace, slipping into the night beyond the northern gate. The enemy there was advancing in tight formation, their armored, vehicles grinding forward slowly. Daniel crouched behind a stone wall with his team. "Listen carefully," he said into the comms. "We don't hit them head on. We split into 3 groups. Group 1 will fire from the left ridge. Keep their attention there. Group 2 will circle wide and hit their rear supply line. Group Sci. 3 stays with me. We'll strike the command unit in the center. If the leader falls, the formation collapses." The soldiers moved silently into position. The first attack came from the ridge, a burst of energy fire that lit up the darkness. The enemy immediately turned their attention there, vehicles shifting to face the threat. That was the moment Daniel gave the signal. Group 2's ambush hit the rear with a violent explosion, taking out a fuel carrier. Flames shot into the sky, and shouts filled the air. "Now," Daniel said, and his group charged from the shadows, straight toward the enemy command unit. Daniel's speed shocked the alien soldiers beside him. He moved low, weaving between cover, his rifle firing in. Controlled bursts. An enemy guard lunged at him with a plasma blade. Daniel ducked, grabbed the soldier's arm, and used his momentum to throw him into another attacker. They broke through to the command vehicle. Daniel leaped onto the side, yanked the hatch open, and dragged the commander out by his armor. The alien leader swung a blade, but Daniel caught his wrist and slammed his elbow into the man's helmet, cracking it. The commander fell, stunned. Daniel grabbed his comm unit and spoke loudly into it. "Retreat! Now!" The enemy soldiers froze, unsure, hearing their leader's voice but unable to see him. Confusion spread, and their lines began to falter. By the time the palace's main defense force arrived, the northern gate was secure. The enemy's push on the west had slowed, giving the defenders enough time to regroup and force them into retreat. Daniel stood with his soldiers, his armor scorched, his rifle empty. Several Varelli troops looked at him differently now, not as a stranger, but as someone who had stood in the fire with them. Back in the war room, Serath listened to the reports with a calm face, but her eyes flicked to Daniel when she heard of his team's success. "You broke their formation," she said when they were alone. "My generals thought it couldn't be done." Daniel shrugged. "Generals think in straight lines. Wars aren't straight lines." Her gaze softened slightly. "You have saved this palace 3 times now, Daniel Cross. My people will begin to notice." "Let them," Daniel replied. "It might make the next attack harder for our enemies." Far away, in a hidden base beyond the outer colonies, a shadowy figure listened to the battle reports. "The human," the figure said slowly. "He is becoming a problem." A voice from the shadows replied, "Then perhaps it is time to remove him. In a way the queen will never forget." The palace was no longer peaceful. The coup had begun. In the early hours, a hidden force of soldiers loyal to the outer colony rebels poured into the city. They moved fast and quiet, slipping through secret tunnels and secret doors. The palace's outer defenses had been weakened by the earlier battle, and now the enemies saw their chance. Queen Serath was awakened by a sharp knock at her chamber door. Daniel was already there, his face calm but serious. "They are inside," he said. "The palace is under attack." Sarath's eyes narrowed. "Then we fight!" Together they moved quickly. Daniel gathered the queen's personal guards, loyal soldiers who would risk everything to protect her. They armed themselves and took their positions in the corridors and stairwells. The first clashes were loud and chaotic. Shouts echoed through the marble halls as rebels fought with the palace guards. Daniel moved like a shadow, striking quickly and disappearing. His training showed. No wasted movements, no hesitation. A group of rebels tried to block the way to the throne room. Daniel ran toward them, firing his rifle in short bursts. When one soldier lunged at him with a blade, Daniel caught the wrist and twisted, sending the attacker crashing into the wall. Nearby, Sarath stood firm, wielding a traditional Virelli energy sword. She fought alongside her guards, her movements, graceful and deadly. Daniel's voice came over the comms. "We have enemy forces approaching the throne room. Hold your positions." The queen's chamber was a grand room of silver and crystal. Sarath stood near the throne, ready to defend it at all costs. Daniel arrived just as a squad of rebels broke through the last hallway. Without pause, Daniel charged forward, leading the defenders. His rifle flashed, and he used his combat knife to disable enemies at close range, the soldiers fighting beside. Him saw something new, strength not just in his weapons, but in his spirit. One young guard shouted, "He fights like a legend!" The battle reached its peak when the rebel leader, a tall alien with cold eyes, entered the throne room. He pointed a weapon at Sarath. "Step down, Queen," the leader demanded. "Your reign is over." Sarath's eyes burned with defiance. "You will never control Virelli." Daniel stepped between them. "She is not alone," the rebel leader laughed. "A human? You think you can stop me?" Daniel's reply was calm but deadly. "I don't think I know." In a flash, Daniel moved. He dodged the leader's blast, closed the distance, and disarmed him with a swift strike. The rebels hesitated, their leader fallen. With their commander captured, the rebels' will broke. The palace guards pushed forward, driving the intruders out. As dawn broke over the city, peace returned to the palace. The battle had been won. In the days after the attack, the palace was filled with new respect for Daniel. Queen Sarath announced to the council that Daniel Cross was no longer just a human diplomat, but commander of the royal guard. The council members, who once doubted him, now listened carefully when he spoke. Sarath stood beside Daniel during the ceremony, her crown shining with new pride. "You have changed my empire," she said quietly. Daniel smiled. "We changed it together." News of the human who saved the Virelli Empire spread across the galaxy. Stories were told of his courage, his skill, and his refusal to give up even when odds were against him. Aliens who once mocked humans now studied Earth's training methods. Virelli soldiers practiced new tactics inspired by Daniel. One evening, Sarath and Daniel stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The twin moons shone softly, and the lights below sparkled like stars. "I thought you were just a common human," Sarath said, her voice soft. Daniel laughed quietly. "Common humans can surprise you." She looked at him, her eyes full of respect and something more. "Together," she said, "we will build a future that no one can break." And so the human who was once underestimated became a legend, a symbol of strength, courage, and hope for two worlds. The story of Daniel Cross and Queen Sarath was only beginning.